Now to start this, what I want you to do is turn your head and look across the room at something in the distance. You might have to turn your chair. Okay, now you're focused on something in the distance, right? Now I want you to look at something just to the left or the right. Now keep looking. I want you to look at it. Look at something just to the left or right of it that's a bit closer. That might be like there's a column in the way, and you're going to look at the column right next to the thing that's in the distance. And now look at the distant thing again. Now look at the column. And now try and look at both at the same time. Now something within your field of vision, I want you to look at something even closer. It might be a person or an easel or something that's a bit closer. Without moving your head much, just look at the easel, look at the thing in the middle distance, look at the thing in the distant distance. Try and look at them all at the same time. Try looking at the thing in the distance and pick something just 1 metre to the side of it. Try and look at the thing in the distance and look at something just 1 metre to the side of it. And now try and look at the first thing, the second thing. Try and look at them both at the same time.
Then I'd say it's definitely a yellow-green, so I'm more yellow in it.
It's a challenge. Try and look at the thing in the close-up distance, the middle distance and the distance at one time, all in focus at the same moment. Now try and look at not just those three objects in your field of vision, but try and look at the things to the side of it as well, in your field of view. Can anybody do it?
No. Well, your eyes tend to... Our eyes are built to do that. No.
So the notion that you can see all objects in your depth of field at the same time, held within a space, is physically and psychologically not possible. You can't do it. You can't do it. So, for some reason, you think that's the way that it exists. Before they invented the camera, paintings were done like this. So it's not one field of vision, it's all little separate objects. This little scene, this little scene, this little scene, this little scene, this little scene. And it travels up the page, so they suggest that there's a distance. By the higher up the page they go, the further away it is. But there's no space around it. There's no depth, it's just vignettes of things that are happening. I could show you any culture, but I'll show you Chinese culture, and I don't want to drag it out, so I'll just go to this one. It's the same thing. It's not a sense of here's the middle ground, here's the background, and here's the foreground. It's just studies of things in all the distances travelling up the page. There's no sense of depth of field there. Then somebody invented the camera in about 1400. And they discovered that when you set this camera up in front of an object and the light comes in and it's a darkened environment here, the vision will project itself onto that screen and you can trace it. Now there's an object, there's a device that allows you to see all the distances at the same time and all the peripherals at the same time and then trace it.
Wow.
They used that for hundreds of years until someone thought of, instead of putting tracing paper there, putting a bit of tin coated in silver, and they captured the image in about, 1850. And then later on they put that silver onto plastic. Or onto glass, actually, was the next step, and then it was plastic. But the camera goes back to that period, and it taught them to lock all those visions into one depth of field. And because they could do that, they could trace it. And they could work out what's the maths. What's the maths of all these lines going into a distant depth? And that became the vanishing point. And it's true. It does happen. If you're a camera. It's true. If you're a camera. So the best I can do to get you to become a camera, if I'm trying to get you to do that, is get you to sit with one eye, put out your pencil, which I've taught you to do all with, put out your pencil this way and measure and check angles of things going into that depth so you can put it on the flat surface. If you didn't have that, they have other devices. Artists use a frame with the grid on it, and you can look through it and you can put it on your canvas. And then I'd say what you're really painting when you're doing that is you are trying to paint the depth of field. Your whole intention is to not to paint the objects as much as the space and the depth around them. That becomes your focus. You want to paint the depth of field. Good. But that's what you're doing. You're painting the depth of field. And when you do that, you begin to ignore other things because you're so focused on the depth of field. And you can follow that equation and you can make a depth of field. And it was a great device, and people were freaked out by it when they saw it. They thought it was like a hologram. You could walk into it. It was as spooky as us watching 3D movies. But it was so intriguing that it just became the basis of what painting was about for 400 years, even though you don't see it that way. When I'm sitting here looking at a room, I don't see it that way. If I can't see the cello, I do this. Because I want to see the cello. And I'm constantly moving and changing the relationships of everything. I don't sit still for a second. Which is why in the Cubist thing, as Picasso and Braque said, painting is a study of something. It isn't necessarily an illustration of the depth of field. And even when modernism hit, it was such a seductive idea that they couldn't let it go. It's still got the single point perspective, and because it was so ingrained in their way of thinking, and it's ingrained in your way of thinking about that depth of field. But I showed you those earlier examples and any modern examples after Picasso that say there's another reason for doing it. If your focus isn't trying to capture space around an object in the way it recedes into the distance, then what are you doing? Which is kind of where a weenie comes in.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so with that preface by Gary, basically what this lesson is about is alternatives to saying, preparation for doing prep for doing my painting is taking a photograph. Because there are just so many other ways of prepping to do and we're actually having this lesson to validate the role of the sketch. What are you doing?
He's making sure it's recording.
Are you on camera?
She is. Are you sure the record button's on? Is the red light on?
Okay, so it's about the role of the sketch in that process that sits sitting before a subject in real experience, so the direct experience, and the painting. And it's just second nature to me, but we actually sort of realised we've never apart from some lessons that we've done that are related to the retreat, which only some of you have been on now, because we haven't had one since the bushfires and COVID, where we do a bit of chatting about using sketches to collect information. If you haven't been on a retreat, you've missed that out. This has got a slightly different emphasis. It doesn't have so much focus on technique, but on the nature of capturing the essence of what you're experiencing when you're actually in that direct experience. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is the definition of sketch? Because you probably have you might have a sort of preconditioned idea that a sketch is lines in pencil, something like that. So I just thought I'd flick through some of my real sketchbook. Basically, my definition of sketch is anything that's in a sketchbook. But obviously it doesn't have to be, it could be on individual bits of paper. So you'll see that some of my sketches are done like diaries, particularly when I'm travelling, and don't have sort of a lot of materials and big things in there, and that one's actually done in black felt tip and a little bit of watercolour, like pencil, which is, I have got very few things with me. But sometimes I do use paint. And even though it's got paint on it, I still call it it's like a paint sketch. And they're perhaps a little bit more elaborate. Sometimes they're as minimal as that, which is me also sketching that where I'm actually capturing something else, which we'll come to, or as minimal as that. Vegetables in a market, or I'll use, perhaps I might use, in this case, watercolour pencil or colour pencils. So really the definition of sketch is really just, for this talk, it's me being in the field or being in the actual direct experience and recording in a sketchbook or on paper sort of preparatory things, because that is the moment I'm actually trying to record. And so some of them will actually record colour, some of them might go in for specific detail, and little sketches that accompanying those ones in Sicily have like me drawing little tiny details of the things that add into that. Some are but some are more compositional, which I've shown you, where I sort of just do sort of directions. But what they all do is they try and extract from that real experience the thing that I'm actually experiencing at the time. And that is multisensual, and it's also what Gary referred to as, I presume he did, I don't know, we talked about it yesterday, but when he said a camera can't do that. It can't sort of do the up and down with your head. It can't actually feel the wind. It can't get the sense of the heat. It can't be a multi-sensual sort of moving within. It can't move through the landscape. It can't have the cacophony of noise. It can't have all those things that are part of the experience of being in that spot. But the sketch can, because the sketch actually interprets that. The photograph just records everything in single point perspective, and basically that's doesn't do the distilling or emphasise the very thing that you're experiencing when you're actually sitting there. So that's why photographs are fantastic support, and I don't not photograph. As you can see, I have the photograph and the sketch alongside in the book, but that's just, the photograph just supports me when I am painting, because I go back and say, oh, you know, what was on that sign, or that, you know, blah blah blah. Okay, yeah, I'll just go back and look at, I'll reference it. But the most the really pivotal thing is what I'm experiencing on the day, and what becomes emphasised, in my case, probably stretched out within the actual sketch. So, here's my notes here. Yeah. So basically, I've got here. I've started with some artists. So this is, I picked two artists, and one was Fred Williams, and the other one was Brett Whiteley. So this is the Yang Ranges in Victoria. And it was a place that Fred Williams, the painter, went back to time and time again and did many series in. So I managed to pull up a photograph of the youth going on into hiking sites and everything yesterday, because there wasn't any in my Fred Williams book. And that's the actual place, all right? So you can see it's sort of scrubby and a bit tangled, and has various sort of levels of I guess, detail going up the picture plane. Not a lot that references anything that would reference itself to what Gary showed you as perspective going back rather than up the picture. There's a sketch. Okay, so you can see what's he actually experiencing from that sitting in a spot like that, which I'm just making an assumption here. I get as close as I could. What's he actually experiencing? What is the experience he's having in that place? I'm a teacher, over to you. Yes, okay, some of those little directional sort of vortexes that you can sort of see are happening, maybe a direction down there, maybe up there, maybe across there. Barrenness, yeah.
The light and shadow.
In spots, yes, there is some. the lust, and you can see here in his drawings, yes, you do have some lighter parts and some darker parts. You have some directional marks through it. You have this sense of him concentrating on the sort of the scrubbiness of it, the sense of that the foliage is reduced to some sort of, I don't know, some sort of overall pattern that just becomes and doesn't involve any sky. It just
But you
goes.
still get the sense that you're out from something.
Yeah, okay. And in actual fact, the first time I ever said, oh, I get Fred Williams paintings was the first time I went in a plane. And I actually looked down and went, oh, I suddenly get Fred Williams paintings, because he does tend to have that sort of aerial, which that photo also does. That is actually zooming in on the landscape, and sort of so the little clumps of trees just sort of reduced to these little sort of spots on a parched land. There's the painting. It's one of them. Here's another sketch. That's pretty minimal.
Wow.
As some of mine are, incredibly minimal. Okay, what am I capturing? I'm catching collective sort of splodge, and then a bit of concentration of splodge, and then space,
Lots of space.
and then space. And here is, oh, that's another one. Again, you can see where those divisions come into play. They just start getting there. And really, we're talking, as some of mine that I just showed you are really minimal sometimes, but they just sort of like, just try and sort of hold something that's part of that experience. So he's got this sort of concentration of dot, 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 and then that form these little sort of vortexes within the work, or sort of shafts within the work, and then it sort of spreads out. And here are the paintings in oil. So obviously these are the Yu Yang paintings, and that's what Fred Williams' style is actually renowned for. So when I talk sketches, a lot of what I do is fairly line dependent, but that's why I want to show you Fred Williams, because his isn't. His is very much about marks. But the person perhaps who I am most closely aligned to, and actually Kenny said tonight when Gary pulled up this book for some reason, he said that looks like Rowena's sketchbook. I don't know when he's seen it. But this is Brett Whiteley, who I think is the ultimate emphasis sketcher. He's absolutely, and even in his paintings, I often say, I don't think Brett Whiteley paints, I think he draws in. He actually has this, but he works. Unfortunately, one of the places we're going to take you to was the Brett Whiteley Gallery when we couldn't go to the art gallery because it shut down half its wings. But last time I was there, which was Mother's Day with my son, they put away all the sketchbooks. But he absolutely was a sketchbook fanatic. He did books and books and books of sketches. So he actually used the sketch as an intermediary between the experience and the painting. And I don't think we're... So here is...
Carcore, is it?
Carcore. How do you know? It's very familiar. This is just a photo I could find of Carcore. It's nothing, I just had to go online and say, and not have Carcore the town, but Carcore. So we've got, obviously, we've got colour, but we've also got just like these little sort of punctuations within the landscape. His drawings for the Carcore series, which are a lovely series that he did called Summer at Carcore. He did a lot of drawing up around Oberon and Carcore and places like that. He is about emphasising the feeling I get. It's almost like, I don't know, I'm putting words into his mouth, but it's like emphasising the feeling of the heat, the way the dusty roads absolutely grab around those hills, the way they're punctuated with rocks and clusters of trees and poplars in different seasons, because he painted in multiple seasons. And that he didn't paint this from this. This came in between, and that becomes like the capturing of what was important on that particular day in that particular experience. So,
What do you think the numbers are capturing? The 1, the 3, the 4,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And there is a creek in Carcourt, even though there's the dusty roads, there is a creek.
Yeah, I've often been there. He has done somewhere it's obviously creek. I thought this one did look like a
Well,
road.
that looks like a road,
Yeah.
but the other one looked like a creek. I thought it was a creek in
Yeah,
Carcourt.
I'm not really sure.
Road. Right, it could be a creek.
So these are obviously those trees.
Yeah.
No, he's done somewhere where there and you've got the sense of that is the sketch for that painting. You can see that. Yeah. Yeah. But in the same way that I love, and if you want a chance to have a look, we've got this book here, which is a beautiful book about Paris, which has some photos and then his sketches. He really pushes out the mark. He pushes out. He stretches out the curve to emphasise the sweep of what's in front of him and the experiencing he's having. Like there's a fabulous one in here of the cars going around the Arc de Triomphe, and
It's almost a little bit like fisheye.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, on a camera where you get the little bit of distortion.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a bit fisheye. There is a certain, I mean, and in some ways it's almost, there's a slight cartooniness about the way he sort of
It's a bit
stretches out.
distorted.
And I'm calling it emphasis, but you know, you might say exaggeration, but it just, what it's doing is it's pushing the emotional feel, because the intention isn't to do a photographic rendition of that.
No.
That's not the intention. He's actually trying to capture that, which is the wininess, the sweeping of the curves,
Dry
the rolling of the hills,
yeah.
the dryness of the
So
thing.
he's actually captured the shape of what he wants the tree to be
Be.
as well, and bushes and
Yeah, and that's very much emphasising that. That's obviously incredibly important to it, and within that space, you know, that's a very minimal sketch, you know. So if you want to have a look at that later, I mean, it really does illustrate what I'm saying. So now we move on to me, because Gary said I need you to talk about what you do. He was actually quizzing me at Christmas when I did. This is my latest series. When I did the Kiama, started doing the Kiama painting, he said, "What are you doing? We need to talk. You need to talk at hART about it." He said, "You really need to do it." He said, "Well, how do you do that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I start with the road, I think." And he said, "That's totally different to the way I start." So this is okay. Here's me.
The world's smallest chair.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We are travelling through Europe, so hence the little tiny. That chair got us in some. I think it looked like it was some sort of it was attached to our bags, like some sort of gun or something, like you know, the gun that the guy who wanted to kill de Gaulle had or something, and fit it together in one. Anyway, so it's just a little triangular school. Now that's me sitting in a street in Syracuse in Sicily. Okay, so there I am with this book. Right? Okay? And you can see I've just got a pen and a watercolour pencil in my hand, and I'm actually doing what we're about to talk about. So, here we are, some of the drawings that are in this book. And basically, as well as writing, I have just been looking down, but the actual picture is that's the photograph. So there's so much. I mean, the photograph doesn't distill anything; it just puts everything in. And but I haven't really. What I was really feeling I was responding to was this. There was this sort of, I don't know, sort of. The alleys were like these little slits in all this sort of detail. There's a little slit going down the middle. So plus I was quite intrigued by some of the details of the lamps and things, but I wasn't drawing that. I was just trying to capture the sense of it being like a little slit in a vertical. and then getting some of the sense of the light posts and things like that. I also was quite intrigued in the Vespa that was down the end of that street. But, and then if I look the other way, why is that blurry? Oh, there it is. No, there it is. Okay, that's me looking up the street. Now, the thing that intrigues me about that is that I had a sense of there being, and it was the first thing I did in the sketch, that the road had an incredible curve, that all these things, like all the Vespas, just kept appearing from around the corner when I was sitting on that little stool. They just kept zooming around the corner and zooming around the corner. And even though I look at the photo, I think actually it was quite straight, really. But my sense of it in my head was that they were just appearing around the corner. And so when I drew it, which is what you see me drawing in that previous photo, which is there. Oh no, this is just another little detail. I really liked all the signs and all that sort of stuff too. That was sort of quirky, and the chairs. There's my drawing, right? And so the first thing I did in this drawing was the zoom around the corner. I did the zoom around the corner because that was my experience of sitting in that spot. And so that gets emphasised, that gets pushed out, that goes there. So, and then all the other things just sort of inform it, like all those funny little balconies and the funny light above the thing. And I obviously took the photo because I needed to come back to it. And then when I got back to Sydney in the studio, I did the painting.
Oh.
And there's the painting. It's uncropped just before it got framed.
Oh.
Now, in the painting, I decided I wanted the Vespa, which was in another street. But, you know, that's what so I just sort of put in the elements from other things. And you'll see this sign in another photograph. But it was about that zoom around the corner. The zoom around the corner. I guess the blondness of the stone and the feeling. And Syracuse has really sort of, clean, blonde stone. It's got a lovely sort of cleanness to it. Unlike Naples. Okay. Now that's our street in Naples where we stayed. And when I drew in Naples, it was a totally different thing. That was our street we stayed in, and I'll show you where we stayed in a minute. So in Napoli, Napoli was just chaotic. Our whole experience, I don't know, who's been to Naples?
It's like India.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
no.
right. I've heard that. Yeah.
So the whole place, apart from feeling like it's slightly dysfunctional, it's just chaotic. It's a cacophony of noise and tangle and garbage and mess
Yeah, but it still functions.
Oh yes,
Which is weird.
It's a mess.
It's
a mess. But
it's
when
so
you're in it, so that's our street in Naples, and it's just full of tooting horns and that's down from the bottom level. But it's just like this, like I said, a visual cacophony, and as well as a sound one, and it's so cluttered and choked and grimy. There's a sort of griminess in it as well.
Rubbiness.
Yes, so rubbiness in it. So anyway, and lots of sort of exposed electrical wires, like India, you know, like sort of exposed stuff that you feel like, you know, it's a health and safety hazard just walking around the streets. But anyway.
What did you draw?
So I drew that. So you can see what I'm responding to, you know. And then I painted that. Now, I actually ended up combining one of my market things with the fruit and vegetables down there, and that sign actually is in the picture. I ended up putting it in Syracuse as well because it was in a lot of places in Italy. But yeah, so but it is it's a sort of a dirtier looking painting, and it's sort of got this sort of tangle of lines and things, and I sort of did simplify it down a bit and sort of.
But still very kind.
Yeah, very kind. But interesting enough, I did a second painting from that street. And that's because we were up on like the 4th floor, and we would look down on the street, and we had a lovely flat actually. It was a really lovely Airbnb. We were up above it. I did that from down below, and it's got a different feel. And it's the feeling of being above it and looking down, and the whole feeling of tasting the best tomatoes on the planet, having bruschetta and black coffee in the morning. And to me, that was all about our experience and the table and the chairs and sort of being above it. I did quite like the washing.
Yeah.
And look, that street you just saw is actually that street down there.
Yeah.
And so that became a very different painting. It actually, from the very same setting, it distilled a different feeling. And there's my sketch, because I just wanted to be about the table. And here's my painting. And it's got something that's breezier and lighter and more about Italy and more positive than about the whole sort of brunch experience while that was going on down here.
What do you, because you do a lot of almost drawing as well, or I guess it is drawing in your paintings.
Yes.
And what do you use to do that?
Yeah, I like that.
A combination of things. I actually do use charcoal quite a lot
Okay.
in with the paint.
Okay.
And I use watercolour pencil and pastel. And so there is quite a lot of drawing in this one. Yeah.
And so, is there
Some of it's piped. That's a pipeline across there.
so it's not all acrylic paint then. It's all different things.
It's a mixed media thing,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
It's on, and that's why I work on paper, which is it just suits what I do. It wouldn't look too thin on canvas. So here's a ombre.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Tuscany, is it?
It's Umbria actually. So we stayed in a hill town in Umbria, and being a hill town, it was like we were above. This was the spot we used to go and have sunset at, and we ended up going there and painting. And you just felt like you were soaring above this landscape. And to me, you'll see, I actually don't sort of paint that. I paint my sensation of being there, which was the sense of the wind, the sense of the landscape actually going vroom, vroom, and just layering and folding in on itself. The sense of these little trees up here doing their little sort of wonderful little manicured pattern things that they were doing. And so when I say it's not just multisensual, it's also about being there and actually going from left to right, which Gary says the camera can't do. It does it there, just for thing. But when you're up there, I was like sort of like, look, I was turning around because we were literally sort of in a pivotal spot, and there was something incredibly almost renaissance about that landscape in the background, with the fringe and the little fringes of the trees, which is the things I love about glamour as well. So there's my sketch, and I think I had it out before. There's my sketch at the time, just a little bit of watercolour and watercolour pencil. And so what I'm exaggerating, if you go back, I'm exaggerating that, I'm emphasising, I'm turning that more into a roll, that more into a roll, just because that's the feeling that I had of the sweep of the landscape at the time. But then when I do the painting, this becomes the source. I might go back to the photo and give it a couple of looks, but that becomes the source from which I derive. Oh, there's another source, because I like my paints out there. That was another, like I said, it wasn't just one view, so I was sort of doing this at the time. And there's my painting. And it's just a bit of corrugated cardboard, cheat on the painting. And the sense, I really like this, which I get from Whiteley too, of having like the painting within the painting, to sort of show what it's doing. It's not very well, it doesn't photograph that way. It wasn't that lolly green actually, a little bit more subdued now, but I think that's just in the photograph. Anyway, so here's the same town in Umbria, which is called Montone, and this is just looking down a side street into the Umbrian landscape in the background. Through a sort of like, I love the sense of looking through the little slits of space into the landscape. And here's my sketch, which you can see has pushed everything out it's sort of pushed these mountains up, it's increased those curves, it's sort of warped the buildings a bit to just create that sense of what I was feeling when I was there. And there's the painting.
Oh.
So in this case, the line work in there, that black piped actually, really fine black piping with like black impasto. All right, now that brings me to Kiama, which is the one I'm working on at the moment. Now, I did this back in January, so this is the latest series I'm doing because we can't travel, so I sort of thought, oh, well, I'll paint Kiama and I knew I was going to paint this road when Gary said, well, why don't we do the hinterland of Kiama as a series? And I said, I know where I want to paint, where I want to do my first drawing. And when I said, okay, stop the car here, this is where I want to do it. He said, why? I said, oh, I absolutely knew, because every time we go down this hill and up, I get a sense of it disappearing down and zooming up the top. And it's about the sense, so it's also about moving through the space in time and not just being at not just a fixed point, but also a fixed moment. So it's almost like it was about the driving. It was about the way the car goes down into that dip and comes up and then goes around the curve. And I said, I want to paint that. I want to paint that road, and goes looking as if to say, what are you seeing here? And so I sat here, and that was the road, but here is my feeling of it. And there it is there. Yeah. So I felt like you dip down and it disappears, and then it zooms around that curve, and everything else is just. And I said to Gary, no, I start with the road. It's the most important thing. I start with the actual road, and like I started with the table with the bruschetta one. It just becomes, that's the central thing, and everything else gets slightly pushed up to just continue to emphasise what I'm feeling about travelling in that dip.
And the size of the paper too, like it's an unusual size because it's so narrow and tall.
Thin, and then emphasise and so that's the so your actual frame shape, which goes right back to when we're doing paint butterflies and cropping things, and saying, look, the size of the actual crop is really important to the feel of the work. And just like the paintings that Gary started with when he talked about the medieval paintings, I never thought that road went back. I've never had the sensation that the road goes back. I only had the sensation that it's going up. Going up the picture plane. It goes up the picture plane, so that's what I've drawn. And I've only had one painting session on this. Like, I've had one go at it, so
That's a very Brett Whiteley.
Yes.
A bit of sensual.
And I'm seeing that there's the telegraph poles coming around. I'm sort of putting in and I knew the road needed a blue base, but I've literally put down some binder and colorised it, and I've actually had one, I don't know, hour session putting that down and haven't got back to it yet. So
Acrylics, sorry.
Acrylics, yeah. That's actually using binder medium as a technique for getting these text surfaces in.
Because it looks like watercolour.
Yeah, well, it is dilution paint. It's diluted with binder medium, which makes it very transparent. And I do that a lot. If you've seen some of my paintings,
so when you use binder and you paint over it, whatever's down on that layer will stay.
Yes, because I just rub it back. So I'll increase the complexity. I've decided I wanted. So obviously I know that there was a brown field there. I can't see it in my photos, but there was. You can see the photo didn't show the brown field, the ploughed field, but it was there behind those trees. And so I've put down the orangey brown, ready to do something over the top. And I've just sort of watery, but I've in this process, yes, I have used a lot of drawing like watercolour pencil, which then it gets incorporated into paint. But that's also why I work on paper, because I use that sort of mixed media thing, and it looks too thin and sort of scratchy on canvas.